Надо сегодня дело придумать.
Это не против тех, кто пришел.
Отже, шановні пані.
So, we continue our press conference, which is entitled The Non-Hearing Season in Crimea. We invited Yevgeniya Andriyuk, expert on international humanitarian law of Krym.SOS Center, and also Roman Ostapchuk, Free Crimea expert, will be talking about how ready or not ready Crimea is to the beginning of the hearing season, and what are the problems of the citizens of Crimea there. The length of the hearing season in Russia differs from Ukrainian. It starts from the 15th of October and lasts till the 15th of April. And according to the Deputy Minister of Household Sector in Crimea, he said the heating season in Crimea will start on the 15th October if the average temperature of the air will not be above 8 degrees. As to the Crimea, in Crimea there are about 18,000 objects which are to be heated. These are mostly residential houses, medical, educational establishments, businesses, and other social structural objects. You see that out of the 18,000 objects, 15,651 are residential houses, besides the infrastructure which supports that is 838 boilers, 185 heating plants, 351 pumping plants, 43 cleaning, water cleaning and the cleaning facilities, 830 wells. We, of course, can also blame Ukraine because that's what all that was in a similar condition in the past. But nevertheless, the occupational authorities who are responsible for the territory which is temporarily occupied, Russia is responsible for the situation in household sector. As of the 20th of October, we see out of 539 educational establishments, only 454 were ready for the autumn-winter period. And according to Yakub Zhitulayev, Deputy Minister of Household Sector in Crimea, he said, we would like to draw attention to Bakhchisarai district. They don't have any storage of fuel. Also, there's lack of fuel in several other districts of Crimea that are located in the northern part of the peninsula, the rural areas where the specific weight of rural population is very big. As of 27th of October, we see that in Simferopol 3 kindergartens, 8 schools, 10 public health buildings, and 70% of residential houses were without heating. So here's the statistical data on how many houses and objects were connected to heating system. Gennady Bakharev had to apologize for the situation. He said, "I apologize for this situation, and by the 1st of November, everyone will have heating." Unfortunately, that hasn't been done. I know that in Simferopol, many residential houses in Simferopol are still without central heating. And that saves the what saves the situation in Simferopol now is that the temperature is more or less warm. In the daytime, it's around 10. So this is the situation. Now Sevastopol. We see that in Sevastopol, as of the 2nd of November, 38 residential houses are without heating. To social objects, the statistical information is like that. They have 89 residential, in Simferopol, 89 residential houses are without heating for kindergartens, 11 educational establishments, and 11 public health establishments. Igor Vasiliev, head of the Department of Civil Defense in Sevastopol, he said during the last week there were 730 complaints sent to the center. The key problem is in Crimea is that starting from this year, the occupational authorities started introducing the principle of replacing different forms of communal management of the property by so-called managing companies. All these companies are now private, so the citizens have to sign new agreements that leads to increase of bureaucracy, because the citizens have to go to the companies which supply gas. They have to go to the companies which supply electricity, and also they have to stand in lines in the household, in the utility companies which are now transferred to managing companies, and that leads to the increase of the epidemic of the diseases like flu and others. As to heating on the territory of Ukraine, the government has started the program of financing autonomous heating of houses, and they partially compensate putting the new windows and other things which helps save the energy in Crimea. And the self-proclaimed Minister of Fuel and Energy of Crimea, Sergei Yegorov, says the total need in coal of the citizens of Crimea is 55-60,000 tons. Approximately 30,000 tons we have. So now that means that the population needs additional 25-30,000 tons. And the price of that well, depends on the quality of the coal. 1 ton of coal on the territory of Crimea is from 5.5 thousand rubles to 11,000 rubles, from 1.8 to 3.7 thousand grivnas per 1 ton. And that is as of October 2015. I understand that this topic is quite complicated, and that is why we invited Gennady Zubko here. We requested to send someone from the ministry, but unfortunately the state bodies of Ukraine ignore the situation. They ignore the needs of the citizens of the occupied Republic of Crimea and of Sevastopol. And many people are talking about that. Only people who are trying to work on these problems are
І, на жаль, ми бачимо, що державні
volunteers, and the state bodies, they ignore what they have to do. If you read the interview of Lenur Islamov in Ukrainska Pravda, he accuses the Minister of Information States in not doing anything. Yevgeniya is in Krym.SOS organization, which is a key organization that helps IDPs. There was an important law passed this week which will be protecting the interests of our citizens who had to leave the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. So let's talk about the situation with heating season and also about this draft law.
If we are speaking about heating season, first important issue that exists with heating and with wood materials and other issues, the experience of people. They say that when Ukraine ruled, this didn't happen, and whether the occupation powers can provide the level of life, and we see the facts that say that it's difficult for people to live there. They can't have the level of life that they had before. This level isn't provided by the occupation powers, and they should provide for the people, and they should provide heating for people. And about the draft law, civil society helped to
Там замечания с точки зрения статуса, за него проголосовал парламент.
and we wait for signing of this document, and the president has 15 days for the signing of the document, and then it can be introduced into action. And it wasn't put into action yet, but we hope that it will happen, and we work on this law and its introduction. We developed this draft of law with our partners from national organizations, and this law introduces a number of changes to the law and lift the limitations starting from the identification and definition what are IDPs, because they didn't include stateless persons or foreigners that were forced to leave Crimea because they were not identified as IDPs in Ukraine, and also registration and the documents they had. So the situation improved, but when President signed this document, there should be documents and provisions. They should adhere to this law, and it will take time. That's why we say that some 3 months are needed for this. And we have a number of problems connected with Crimean IDPs. These problems are not solved, and we are speaking about these problems such as pensions, bank deposits that regardless of the statement of National Bank, the bank boycotted these decisions and they block these accounts. So the situation with the bank is unsolved, and I say that we have 3 examples when people they opened accounts in the territory of Ukraine and Kiev banks, and banks refused to give the money back to the people, motivating this by that they got compensation from Russian authority in Crimea. And it's not impossible to do this if they open this account in the Ukrainian affiliate in Kiev. So I give the floor to Yevgeniya Roman Ostapchuk, and what is the situation with the heating? Does it improve, or maybe some tendencies are to the worsening of the situation? The tendency, not only in the heating sphere, but in the cultural and social sphere, worsens every day in Crimea. And we should say that comparing Russian legislation and Ukrainian legislation, both in Russia and Ukraine, heating season starts from the 15th of October, and it can be started earlier if in Ukraine there's a temperature of about less than 8 degrees Celsius, and in Russia the period is 5 days, because the regime is there's a 2-day difference in the starting of the heating seasons between our countries. So we had the data for on the 4th of November, 70 houses in Sevastopol, they were not provided with heating, and Occupation Power started to connect these buildings to central heating. And if we say about the old Crimea, many places are not provided with gas, and many people use autonomous heating boilers. And comparing with our previous topic about the goods blockade, and the prices raised, and they varied from 1,500 to 3,000. The price of coal varies in this range because coal is delivered by Kerch Strait is provided to Crimea, and it influences the price, and it influences the situation for the people, because many people can't buy this coal for this price, and the situation gets only worse. And they continue not to hit kindergartens. The situation is bad also in schools and hospitals. And the situation, they don't put much effort into it. And school 30 in Simferopol, last week, there were holidays and for Ukrainian and Russian school children, and parents addressed central institution for education, and they said about they should continue holidays because there was no heating in institutions. And temperature in schools forced parents not to allow their children to go to school, and that's why these holidays were continued, because there was no heating in schools. It's understandable. And I wanted to discuss other issue with Yevgeniya, and the situation is really pressing. And this week, Liliana Zhurova, I know her personally, starting from 1990s. And what is important, she was an expert for my book, Island Crimea, and I invited her to presentation, and she said honestly that I would comment, but I can't leave Crimea because I couldn't go back there, and that is important for me. And this story, she told me about her grandchild. He was in Crimea and he studied there, and she said that he was beaten by his classmates, and he was seriously injured, and now he is going to be operated and what about the actions of Ukraine as to the maybe we should get our citizens out of there?
In general, the situation shows that when the official authorities say everything's fine here and everything's fine with Crimean Tatars, tells about the opposite. The activists say that's the reaction to blockade, but we see that the actions on persecution of Crimean Tatars and pro-Ukrainian activists are systematic. We just can hope that nothing worse happens. From the point of view of how to react, how to protect the rights, do people have to stay? Yes, there are some people who leave the territory of Crimea. There are also people who, because of certain circumstances, will stay there. That's the personal choice of every person. But unfortunately, the actions of Ukrainian authorities are very weak. We do not see any systemic activity of Ukrainian authorities on protecting the rights, but Ukraine has filed several cases to European Court on Human Rights, Ukraine versus Russia. That's related to Crimea. Now we are collecting evidence for International Criminal Court.
Опять же, мы не видим в этом там такой вот системности, которая была бы...
But we don't see any systemic work. Besides the international institutions, there are certain diplomatic things which are to be done. Well, after the searches, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs should at least make a statement. And they should communicate that to other countries. Now, Ukraine has become the non-permanent member of the Security Council of the UN, and that's a great forum where people could talk about that systemically. And why did the blockade start? Because there were no systemic actions. So protection of human rights in Crimea is really very important issue, because no international organizations can enter Crimea, but also Russian lawyers have very limited access there. We are discussing the ideas of civil reception offices. Thank you. If you have any questions, please raise your hands. If not,
Дякую. Таке питання.
when you mentioned this topic about heating in Crimea, many representatives of Russian authorities were saying, why do we need heating from Ukraine? We have Russia, it will supply everything for us, gas as well. What can you say? How does Russian side comment that? What's the reaction? What is their reaction to the situation with heating in Crimea?
На рахунок
Talking about gas, I cannot tell you about gas, but there is information that there's the threat
російська кримська теперішня влада зараз всі
Crimean authorities want to, well, actually there is a threat the centralized supply of electricity will be disconnected to Crimea, and the same may happen with gasification. The general trend at the central level, everyone says that that's a systemic mistake, but when we see that
Заявление о том, что все были готовы, но это было вранье.
the statement that everyone was ready, these were lies. But now they say that it's up to specific people. You can see the trend, that is transferred to specific people. They say these are these specific people who are guilty in that. That's not, this is not a systemic mistake. Aksionov statements remind of statements of Putin and Lukashenko. The trend is that I'm a local Tsar and I can say anything. We're not guilty, this is not our problem. That's what they are saying. Someone else is guilty, and they even dismissed someone. They say you are guilty. Yes, they do have this strict administrative vertical in Russia. They punish the civil servants quickly, and in that the situation with responsibility is better because they have this hierarchic model. In Ukraine we have sort of democracy, but for a long time we cannot make responsible people who do not execute their duties, like General Prosecutor Shokin. He now took a vacation, but in Russia they resolve these problems very quickly. But Crimea has, they do feel this personnel hunger. Aksionov says that they don't have qualified people in Crimea. Where are they? Most of them started working for new Russian occupational bodies, but they say that they lack them because bureaucratic apparatus is much bigger than Ukrainian. All those who could find jobs, they found jobs, and now they lack people. They start bringing people from Ossetia, Tatarstan, Central Russia, and that leads to new conflicts. We know that the line of distribution, of the line of dividing to locals who and the Russians who arrive from other regions, is this division is very big. We know the Soviet tradition when everything was cleaned before some big holidays, but here we know Russia was celebrating their Day of National Unity, which Putin launched to forget about the 7th of November, the day of October Socialist Republic, so that people get drunk on the 4th of November, and the 7th of November they will not celebrate. But with all that, we see that in both Simferopol and Sevastopol, two biggest cities, most of the facilities, most of the objects are without heating. So here we will finish today, but in a week we will continue in UCMC. We will be talking about new things, about new challenges, about the wave of political persecutions which is taking place in Crimea, and we will try to talk about the situation with human rights in more detail. Thank you, Yevgeniya. Thank you, Roman, and see you again.